Hey, welcome everybody. Another Tortoise Open news meeting. Happy Tuesday to you all. I'm David Taylor, one of the editors at Tortoise, and just by way of a weirdy little experiment today, we're going to live stream on Twitter. So we all know that's a very civilized place, so please don't swear, and if you're a bot, don't at me. So anyway, before we get going, I just want to say it's a chance to start with the fact that last Friday, when the shortlists were announced for the British Journalism Awards, we got 7 nominations for our work. And it really felt like a watershed moment for this quite young still newsroom. And again, not to overdo it, but let's just say our shortlisted work included some of our podcasts, some of our written investigations. It spanned things like the power of tech giants, campus safety, corruption in Malta, secret world of media barons, care homes run for profit, and UK government chaos. Quite a lot of UK government chaos. And people like Alexei Mostros, Matt Ancona, Ella Hill, Chris Cook, Paul Caruana Galizia, freelance journalists that we love working with like Jane Martinson and Ian Birrell all got nominated. And I don't say it to boast, but I do think, it's worth taking a moment just to reflect on what we've done from some kitchen tables and back bedrooms during this strange old year. So, as I said, I mean, you know the drill by now. This is where ideas start for our work in open news. We want to hear from everybody. You can pitch ideas. We've got a certain sort of idea of where we might go with the conversation, but we're ready to go off at a wild tangent whenever you want to. We've got my colleague Liz Mosley's running the chat today, so that's bound to be the place where the real action goes on. And I think just to get us started, I suppose, thinking about UK government chaos, I hope you'll all forgive me for turning to that as the starting point today. It's going to be quite a big week for us, we think. At Tortoise, we're doing something new on Friday where, in the spirit of causing trouble, we want to launch in the absence of an official government public inquiry, we want to launch our own. We think the case is clear and urgent for a proper examination of the UK's failures to control coronavirus. And so we're going to launch one. It's going to go over multiple Fridays, and my colleague Mary P. Mills has been organising it, so we're going to hear from her in a little moment. But I think just to before we do that, to throw it open, and what I'm hoping is it's a chance this for everyone to weigh in. What have we missed? What have been your personal experiences? All of us have had our life events interrupted. A lot of families have felt the impact. So to use the chat to start the conversation there. But if Merapi's with us, I would love to turn to you first up, Merapi. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Dave. A little bit bored of lockdown at this point.
I know, my goodness. I mean, I've changed rooms just to try and mix it up, but yeah, it's a slog. You can't deny it. Merapi, I suppose in some ways, what we're trying to do with this COVID inquiry is really about trying to get to the truth of what happened in the UK in 2020. And I hope you can just give us a sense of what you've been working on and what we should expect on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a sense from us here at Tortoise that the end of the year was a good time for us to launch a COVID inquiry. The government has failed to commit to one, and we wanted to. And we, even before there was talk of a vaccine, we felt that this would be a good period to look back on everything that's happened. And now, with news of the vaccine coming just in the last few months of the year, it feels more appropriate than ever, I would say. So we're looking back at 2020, and specifically the 3 days are roughly structured around what I see as the 3 points of COVID, which was the early period, the first peak, when we first heard of it coming out of China, our delayed lockdown, all that sort of stuff. And then we've got the second day is the middle section, which is what I would call the summer lull, where everyone got a taste of freedom again. There was eat out, help out questions around whether that was a good economic policy, travel corridors, quarantines, messing up the education system and exams. So that's the second day. And the third day, which is December the 4th, is what I would call the sort of second peak. We'll look at the vaccine in the very last, funnily enough, that session is currently titled, Did the Healthcare Industry Act Quick Enough? But I think we're going to have to take in some of the sort of vaccine nervousness around the fact they've acted so incredibly impressively quickly into that last session. So that's broadly how it's structured. The first session is this Friday the 20th. I can briefly run through, for those of you who don't know, what the agenda looks like. I'll just tell you that the 5 sessions we're running on Friday, starting at 8 in the morning. The UK, how did it fare? The lost month, what happened in February, that sort of delayed moment when we had that head start on Italy that a lot of people feel we didn't act quickly enough on. The failures of test and trace inside the NHS, and what happened in care. So if anyone has any thoughts or stories or ideas that they want to bring to the inquiry on Friday, we would dearly love to hear from you. It's not quite the same as our usual thinking format, not least of all because we have lawyers at the start giving us opening statements, but there will be the chat forum where we'll be hoping to draw out relevant witnesses. So if you have something to say, please come along, a personal story, a personal experience, please come along and do so.
And who are the lawyers who are kicking us off? And are they going to are they acting as de facto prosecutors? What are they doing?
We've got 2 formats for the lawyers, where we're actively taking on the government's decision. We've got 2 lawyers, one prosecuting the government and one defending. And in the first 3 sessions, the prosecutor is Nazir Afzal, who some of you might have seen at our Thinkers before, and the defender is Joshua Rosenberg. It's very important for me to say these are not his personal views. He's taking on this position based on the information we are delivering him, and because we felt the need to have the defence voice in there without, say, Matt Hancock joining our inquiry to give whatever his case would be. In the other sessions where where we're sort of more inquisitorial, what happened in care inside the NHS, we'll just have one lawyer presenting both sides. And that's just a short part of it, that's just the start. And, as you would see in an inquiry, and the editor will act as the chair throughout. And just like an inquiry, there will be a transcript afterwards.
Do you get a wig, Meripy?
Sorry? I will be wearing a wig. In fact, I am now. No, I'm not.
Still got a couple of days.
Any excuse to wear a wig.
Be awesome. I should just remind people, Nazir Afzal, I interviewed him earlier in the year. We did a podcast with him. He's the former chief prosecutor, and his brother died in the early days of COVID, and they as a family were very, very watchful of obeying the government regulations during that deep period of lockdown. And of course, their bereavement, their wrenching thing, all happened at the same time as Dominic Cummings was going up and down to Barnard Castle and breaking the whole thing apart. So, he's he has got some skin in the game, hasn't he? And I think will be very powerful as the opening voice.
He is very equipped to take the prosecuting case in the first 3 sessions. But the actual Cummings session, I should say, is on day 2, Cummings and communication failures.
Right, so we'll all bring our cardboard boxes along for that one and our beanie hats. Wigs day 1. Yeah, okay, got it. All right. What do you? So Meripy, let's just keep going with it though for a bit. What do you think? I mean, it's great, isn't it, that we as a newsroom are devoting a lot of time to trying to delve into all of these issues? What do you hope we might get out of it from a journalistic point of view?
Well, I mean, it's always hard to say exactly what we'll get out of it until we've done it. But I think it is, in some ways, it is very defining of what Tortoise is about, which is to not just live in the moment, but to look back at the bigger stories of the year, and really sort of look for the stories that we might have missed. There might be a lot of headlines spent on one specific story, but that overlooked, fatalities in particular hospitals, particular areas, and possible lies that were told, and possible decisions and information the government had at their disposal. This is what they knew. This is the decision that was reached, and was that right? So as with everything we do at Tortoise, we are approaching it slowly, not forgetting the old stories, the missed stories. So I do hope that we will be able to produce some really interesting journalism out of it in January and February, when I think we will be entering a sort of new chapter of COVID, where we'll all be, addressing the vaccine, who gets it, whether people want to take it, and that sort of thing.
It's pretty exciting, isn't it? I'm really, I think it's going to be, I'm sure it's been a nightmare.
You have lots of really interesting, knowledgeable people attending, and so yes, it would be great to see you all there.
Great. Am I right in thinking that that the great Giles Wattell from the esteemed SenseMaker team has also been working on this for you, doing some of the digging into the data?
We have. So I don't think Giles is on this call today. I think he is somewhere else. I think he's in Belgium. I don't know why, but he might be.
Doing multiple reporting in the world. Great.
But we are producing for every session our great Tortoise writers, researchers that have all have produced a set of notes, sort of small dossier, because it's going to the lawyer, for each session with data and everything in it. And the first lot, they'll be coming the Wednesday before the Friday. They'll be available the Wednesday before the Friday of the day. So tomorrow we will have a set of notes for the 5 sessions I mentioned earlier on Friday.
Fantastic. Okay, well, brilliant. Thank you for setting that up for us. I'm just gonna have just a whiz through the room if I could. I wonder if Liz, if there's anybody in the chat who you think we should be speaking to early on. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to answer the question, what was the track that was played? It was This Is the Kit that we came in to. It's a fantastic album that's been keeping me going for the last couple of months. I really recommend it.
Hi Dave, sorry, the chat is very quiet today, uncharacteristically so for Tortoise members. I'll post a link to the news list, which sometimes prompts people to get going in terms of comments, but I've just seen that John Drummond has just posted, as has Tessa Murray, so you can always start with John and Tessa while everybody else.
Why don't we I would absolutely take my lead from that then. John, why don't you just share with the group the urgent questions that you think we ought to be delving into over these 3 days?
This is my first editorial conference, so I'm not quite sure how they work in practice. But if
have an opinion and say it clearly, that's all you got to do.
Excellent. So if I were running an inquiry, the kind of questions I would like to explore is, I'm keen to understand why we haven't tested different interventions in order to identify which ones are working and which don't. And much more visible comparative information between the interventions practiced by other countries and what works and what hasn't. The jury is still extraordinarily out in terms of whether lockdown is the way of securing real change, given all the various other ripple effect impacts, or whether there are alternatives. I'd be interested in why the government chose to put returning to normal so high in August with it Eat Out to Help Out, in order to rescue the micro businesses that are dependent on big businesses in Canary Wharf and elsewhere, rather than actually looking at this as a liminal period for transformational change. I'd be interested in finding out why government communications have been so shit. It's quite extraordinary how, as someone who's deeply involved in behavior change, how the government is flitted from one message to another. And I'm massively interested in why the billions of pounds spent in contracts hasn't been publicly debated, and why the massive consultancy organizations and technology businesses that have been given contracts, why don't we know who they are and why they failed? Why are they not accountable? Just some of the questions I'd have.
Where are you joining us from today, John?
I'm joining you from Manchester.
Right. So I've fallen into the trap of assuming that you might have been joining us from north of the border and might have a view on how it's been handled in Scotland relative to the UK, but perhaps you do anyway.
Yeah. I think Scotland's managed it better in that I think the approach to communications has been much more in your face, less politicized. I think Nicola Sturgeon's played a good hand here. And I think it's I think it's smart because she's just said it how she sees it. And depending on how you stand, I think it's reinforced her case for independence, which is potentially troubling or welcome, depending on how you feel about independence.
Yeah.
On that point, since I'm still unmuted, I will say on that point that the day 3, the December the 4th day of the COVID inquiry, the first session is called the Prime Minister, but it will also be looking at what we're calling the disunited kingdom, which was the sort of different regional approaches and who handled it better and where. And on your other points, I should say that day 2, we're looking at, you know, the Eat Out to Help Out, the economy, and whether those were the right decisions there. And the coming session is also about communication and mixed messages, because I think we can all agree that communication has been flawed. So I do hope we are addressing all of these points, is what I'm trying to say.
That's a brilliant call to action from John, and again, not to blow the gaff on everything that we're doing in the coming days, but you know, turns out we've got a summit about cities tomorrow, which I'm sure is going to be particularly interesting because we've got not least Andy Burnham there speaking for the Northwest, and then next week actually. We're working on something about Scotland and independence, and so all of these things are slightly spanning the genres, we could say. Now, Tessa Murray, my colleague, is never short of an opinion. How are you doing, Tessa?
Well, thanks, Dave.
The absolutely nicest possible, imaginable way. How are you doing?
So I was slightly looking forward to next year, which we're not really doing, but that was just my point, that I think everything we're storing up is going to come home to roost next year. Sorry, my door's open, it's noisy. But there are two things that if I were to sort of just step off the hamster wheel of this year a wee bit and think, you know, get to the end of the year and look back and think, bloody hell, you know, what was all that? There are two things. One is I simply can't get past the concept that you would approach any problem, whether it's in government or business, without having the data. So I just cannot get past this idea that we didn't have a testing system that worked. Just makes no sense to me. And the second is something that came up in a conversation that Mary P and I were having with one of the lawyers actually last week, which has been worrying me ever since Merapy, was this idea that we're being governed by secondary legislation, and that the way that we've sort of had the parliamentary processes have played fast and loose with huge sort of areas of our liberties and choices, is of a deep concern. And we had that amazing compliance during the first lockdown because we felt we were all in it together and that we were on a mission and we could do this. And we've had the fraying of that compliance with lockdown and lockdown 2 because, frankly, nobody, because the trust in the government has gone. And yet we are still blindly letting parliamentary processes just be entirely bypassed. And I think that's something we're going to wake up from, I hope, very soon.
And your points in the chat are well made, though, that whilst I suppose the exercise that we're about starting on Friday is trying to make sense of what just happened, the throw forward that you talk about, marginalized communities, young v old priorities, mental health, educational fallout, these are the things where the seeds have been sown in 2020, haven't they?
Yeah. And I mean, just from personal experience, Dave, I've got teenage kids. And from my own experience of watching them in the last few months, one had her GCSEs cancelled, the other one is about to do A-levels. It has been brutal watching their mental health deteriorate this summer.
Really?
And going back to school. Yeah, it's been really tough. The uncertainty, the anxiety, the worry that they won't take their exams, so every piece of work now becomes mission critical. The privilege guilt, which they carry very, very heavily, my two, that they've been okay, other people haven't, that their grades are unfair because they've had decent teaching remotely, all of it combined with, shit, my life was about to begin and now it's gone on hold. Is it worth going to university? Everything's just gone up in the air, and it is, and I've had to speak to various people in the last couple of months to get the right help for them, and it is an absolute I was going to say epidemic, but we've overused that word this year. It is a huge issue that is rife, and I think we will see the road to next year's A-levels and degrees just littered with the broken and bloody psyches of young people.
That's a really chilling way of thinking about it, and I mean, I'm certain you're right, and I suppose what that does tell you in a very vivid way is that the actions of government have reached into the lives of every family, haven't they? Whether it's education or whether it's birth or marriage or death, there's no family that hasn't been marked by the actions of government, and you do wonder politically. It's not the most important thing, but it's, I suppose, significant. You do wonder politically what the price will be to pay for all of that. I'm thinking I might just bring in Matt D'Ancona if you're in the room, Matt.
I'm here.
Good man. So you've been causing trouble again this very day. I think we've launched in the app a podcast which has now become like one of your signature moves. The sort of hey, you tell me, what's the genre here? It's like it's an audio essay. Tell me what it's about, and tell me where you think we are with the COVID inquiry in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a genre like all genres that's emerged from a context, and I think that I remember the first piece I wrote on the pandemic was commissioned by you, Dave, which was inspired by a mutual love of Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, and you got me to do a piece about the first 28 days of first 28 days of lockdown. And at the time, I remember thinking, 28 days is quite a long time. And I was just working out, we're now about 239 days in. So that gives you a sort of, that's where it's come from, which has been a sort of desire to check in occasionally with how this government is doing, or rather not doing. and capture some of the drama behind the door of number 10, which has been, particularly in the last few days, we've all seen intense. And
what's the frame you've given yourself for this one?
This frame is inspired by the idea that what happened in the last few days, which led to the departure of the fabled Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's now former chief advisor, and Lee Kane, another Vote Leave veteran who was his communications director. And they had clashed with the Prime Minister's fiancée, Carrie Simons, and his incoming spokesperson, Allegra Stratton. And what we've done is we've traced back that sort of soap opera to another day, which was the 24 hours over October the 30th and Halloween, October 31st, which was when the PM was sort of bounced into a second English lockdown by a meeting he had of the four main ministers, Matt Hancock, Rishi Sunak, himself, of course, and Michael Gove, with the two main scientists, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance, presenting. And the meeting was very tense, and Vallance and Whitty offered a series of projections, including the now notorious projection that if something wasn't done, that we could end up with 4,000 deaths a day. And what then followed was a kind of 24 hours of complete fiasco and soap opera and mayhem, as bit by bit the story leaked out to the press, and the Times, Mail decided to go with it, and so all the other media organizations followed. And Johnson was furious that he was forced by that to bring forward the announcement of lockdown to the Saturday, not having really made his mind up fully to go for it, but he had to. There was politically no option. And the Saturday was just a sort of farce of a very grumpy cabinet meeting, as he presented the cabinet with more or less a fait accompli, and then a press conference which was very subdued. When you'd have just expected a prime minister to rise to the occasion and offer some stirring and serious oratory and a sense of urgency. It was very apologetic and subdued. And Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance gave what I think may well still be the worst slide presentation in the history of Western democracy. It was.
You've seen some good ones yourself.
It was amazing. The thing that sort of governs the kind of thing that links all these kind of situation reports we've been doing on the pandemic, and that, to Merope's point earlier, we'll be looking at in the inquiry, is that it's very clear that populist governments don't do pandemics. They can't, because they govern by divisiveness and slogans and setting people against each other, and very, very strong hostile briefing. Cummings and Kane were very, very aggressive. They used the tools they used to win the Brexit referendum and the general election last year. And you just can't transfer that toolkit to something as complex and nuanced and grown up, frankly, is what you need an administration to be to back a pandemic. And they can't do it. So they're now in this very odd limbo period with Johnson back in social isolation, self-isolation, and promises of what's called the Great Reset, Cap G, Cap R, but no real clue as to what this involves. My hunch is that it doesn't really have very much content, but the personnel will change, and Allegra Stratton will become a very important figure. She's the new she'll be on camera as spokesperson for number 10, which is in itself a very audacious innovation. Carrie Simons, his fiancée, is obviously now serious power in the land there. They can't find a chief of staff that is a serious figure. They've asked lots of people, no one has said yes, which is, when you think about it, amazing. And they've still got quite a serious problem on their hands, many hundreds of people dying every day. They've just announced a tightening up of the tiered levels of restrictions for when we theoretically come out of the national lockdown on December the 2nd. And the whole farm is now bet on the vaccine coming. I think that this is not thinking about the vaccine, but my hunch is the vaccine will arrive, but it'll be a lot more of a sort of process driven. It will take a long time to roll out. There'll be glitches, and what you're seeing in some is the level of dysfunctionalism in this government is quite extraordinary. I mean,
do you think it's thinking back to your 28 days later piece? I was not really intending to join the dots, but I was asking myself just before this session, you know, are we now doomed to like 4 years of a zombie government? There's just like every single day we're going to stumble into another pratfall, and it is literally going to be 4 years of saying you'll never guess what they've just done now. Or are they capable? I trust there are some really good people in this government still. Are they capable of getting themselves out of this?
Well, that's obviously now we're going to find out, because there was no one more dominant in the government, arguably including the Prime Minister himself, than Dominic Cummings. And now he's gone. We're going to find out what the rest of them are like. And the promise is that the lesson has been learned, and there's going to be a more collegiate, more adult process. I have certain doubts about that, because I think that the reason Cummings was there was because Boris Johnson appointed him. He wanted someone who was a bruiser and adversarial by temperament and picked fights. And actually, that's not how you get something like this sorted. So, to your point, Dave, I think they've got an 80-seat majority, which isn't going to crumble anytime soon. The question on a lot of Tory MPs' lips now is how long Boris Johnson is going to last. I mean, that, to an extraordinary extent, less than a year after he won this great, election triumph, is sort of the question, which is, does he still have what it takes to be a prime minister? He is very much on probation, which again is, you get one of those strange plot twists that you can never foresee, but he really is. And they're a brutal party, the Tories. They will not, they won't balk at getting rid of him if they think that he's endangering them. But I think there are bigger things than who's leader of the Tory party at stake here.
That's for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for that. And that's I think modestly, I would say a required listen this week if you've enjoyed the others. I'm just gonna come to Lucy Huberman if I could. Lucy, how are you?
Hello.
Hiya, how's things?
I'm afraid I've escaped up to Norfolk. And,
have you?
I'm on this clinically critically vulnerable list now. So I
hope you found yourself in a good and safe spot.
I'm fine. I'm a lucky person.
You're rocking the knitwear today.
Yeah.
I think what I was going to say was you appear to be in danger of committing news in the chat. So, I thought I might.
It's gossip.
Come to you. All right. Well, that's where news begins, doesn't it? Surely.
I was just no. I'll tell you what. I could. Sorry.
Two things that I was going to ask you about that you've raised. One is you talked about you're working on the idea of a memorial for COVID, and I don't know whether you mean a memorial day or a literal figurative monument, but it's something I was chatting to a member of the clergy in Cardiff back in the start of all of this, and the idea that somehow all these funerals that have been missed, is it possible that we could come together for a service of memorial as a nation at some point? Is that what you have in mind, or what are you working on?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not doing it very publicly, but I can talk about it. Yeah, it's okay. When I've talked to you, Dave, back early on in lockdown, and I was very much concerned with how much unacknowledged grieving was going on. And I was trying to write about it in a way that, perhaps wasn't right for the moment. But I was wondering really about all of the people who have lost relatives, but not only lost relatives, haven't been able to be with people that they promised to look after, either in hospitals or in care homes, haven't been able to have the normal types of funeral rituals they would normally have in Islamic and Jewish communities. And the sort of the numbers, the everyday numbers are just numbing. And I started sort of looking around for people who were beginning or not beginning to speak about grieving, and trauma. I was doing that because I was reading about trauma on the front line, staff, beginnings of suicides, and thinking really about why. I mean, I know why in England we wouldn't have any governmental-led tributes to these kind of feelings or deaths, because they've so cocked it up. I mean, they just can't, they couldn't do something to point to the utter misery of it all. And then I thought, well, maybe it's the culture of this country as well. And I found that some spiritual leaders were talking about it a bit. And I've looked at memorials that are going on around the world, or artists who've, I posted something on my Twitter feed yesterday about all of these artists in America making very beautiful local memorial places. And then I got talking to some people who wanted to put together a day, an event. And I've been speaking to two groups who are planning, well, they want there to, I mean, they want there to be like a national memorial day for COVID, and they want it to be on the 1st of January, 2021. And I've been doing quite a lot of thinking with them and talking to people around it. And my view is that it's too soon, and that we'll be at peak deaths again, I'm sorry to say, at the end of December from what the scientists are saying. But that's not to say there can't be all sorts of tributes, or for people to mark the day, if that's what these other guys want, with lighting candles and things. So at the moment, I'm just in a situation where I have spoken to a lot of people, including the person that I've outed, but not by name, who runs a national arts organization, because I was looking for a venue. And I got a lovely offer of a venue. And we were chatting, and he was saying January the 1st, what a nightmare in a way, because it's people will be at home, you know, insofar as we'll be allowed to be with people close to us, maybe we will be. You know, most venues, and I'm on the board of a music venue, and Matt Session was very good about this, you know, have been closed or are struggling. So if they would have to open, especially on that day, that would be difficult. And then he came out with, I'm not going to say who it is, but he just came out with this, what I posted, that you said risks becoming news, that there was a feeling that this lockdown, I mean, the scientists know that this lockdown is not doing the job. It's not the same as the first lockdown. The schools are open. There's a lot of activity. Every shop where I am is an essential, if it's selling sweets or Halloween or you know, decorations. It seems to be essential. So I don't think the only battle going on is about Cummings and the future of the admin of the party. I think there is a sort of Valence Whitty battle, a Valence and some of the other scientists battle, and the one they keep pulling out now, I can't remember his name, Wolpert, I think, on Newsnight. He's more or less said it as well, but he's too English to say it properly. It's not working. So I think there's a huge debate going on about closing down more and then opening up and then closing again. Now, so just to get back to the memorial idea, I am working on something. I don't really want to say who I'm working with at the moment, because I've been talking to a leading grief specialist, a therapist who's been working with grief. I've talked to a rabbi. I've talked to a priest. It should, in my view, be something interfaith and non-governmental and simple, whether it's on the internet. And then if people want to mark a moment, fine. In terms of a big national event, I was listening to the story of the unknown warrior being laid to rest, and there were 3 wonderful short programs on the BBC, 15 minutes each, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, last week. And that was a story of a priest. I mean, you might know the story. A priest went to visit some officers during the First World War in France to a billet, and in the back garden there was this makeshift wooden cross just sticking in the ground with the name of a troop or a regiment, I don't know, no name of a person. And this idea stuck with the priest, and he wrote to a bishop, and it took 2 years with the king and the prime minister being at odds with each other about whether 2 years later was too late, and it would re-traumatize people to think about it again, or was it the right time? So I think if you're thinking about, you know, if people want to do something major, I think it will take some time to do. And I don't know, I think people will be very, very angry with the government. So I don't know how, I just don't know how it could become a sort of a national day. But, you know, in the end, people were very angry with the officer class in the First World War, weren't they? They led the troops into terrible situations. And so well, I don't know what people think. What do people?
But I think the motivation behind that and the instinct behind that is absolutely right, isn't it? On the memorial, because I think there is a need for a coming together in that way. But your little bit of as well, which again, if people didn't spot it in the chat, was essentially a suggestion that that this current lockdown will extend, but there will be a brief tinsel covered moment of reunion for 10 days before it all locks down again. So we'll see, but it certainly doesn't feel like we're moving forward that quickly. I wonder if
I'd just love to hear I'd love to hear in the chat or afterwards if anybody feels it would be a good idea to do something, and what kind of thing. Okay, sorry, I've hijacked the chat now.
No, not at all. No, very, very good. And just sort of diving into some of the chat there, I can see that one of the things that I think that John, who spoke earlier, was talking about was the opportunity for reshaping, I suppose, the way we live, and I think cited the example of, you know, taking traffic out of central Barcelona, and I know that that seemed to have become a little bit of a hot topic in the chat. So I think John was very much pro the opportunities, and I think was it Sam Houston who was saying, you know, this isn't actually an opportunity. And Sam, I wonder if you want to just pitch in and tell us what's on your mind.
Hi guys.
How you doing? Hello? Yes, you're good.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's not that there are not opportunities. It just I've ever since COVID turned up, really. I mean that thing about Barcelona is a thing that's also happening in London, and government and the DfT immediately dived into that. And that, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. The only point I made was that it's a global pandemic. It's not first and foremost an opportunity for transformational change, or, you know, there will of course be opportunities to build back better. But I think that, you know, priority really has to be given to getting through what we're in first. We don't need to see everything as this massive kind of transformational opportunity.
And yet, you know, there's somebody at our front door, which I'm going to ignore and hope someone else answers that. But if not, I'll just exit that way in a moment. Yeah, I mean, why waste an opportunity though? Everything's an opportunity, right? I mean, why stand still?
But Dave, we can't really see what the opportunities are at the moment. You know, we're in the middle of something we're trying to kind of clear, and we're spending half this call talking about whether or not our government has been ineffective, you know, and comparing our government to other governments. But also there is this kind of view of 2 or 3 years down the road and where we'd like to be. And I think it's a little bit unrealistic to be doing both of those things at the same time. you know, it's great to talk about having less traffic, and we all want there to be less traffic. And you know, I'm sure, and also I think it was Andrew was talking about the kind of digital transformation. I was on a Zoom meeting yesterday. I still would have preferred it to have been a physical meeting. That's just my personal view. But I think that some of these changes are you know, possibly overstated, and clearly we won't know until sometime in the future. So I just think, you know, let's get through what we're in and see where we are kind of next year. Not everything is an opportunity for transformational change.
You clearly,
clearly
haven't seen inside my kitchen. I mean, it's been a year of transformation in there, I can tell you. So I would like to go to Lily Evans, if she's around. Lily, I mean, you've really taken this into a different direction, and a slightly chilling one as well. I think talking about growing up in former Yugoslavia and what you see today that that makes you think of that era.
Hello. Yes, I'm afraid what I see playing out here is a slow car crash that is leading to the breakup of the country. And that doesn't have to be all bloody. Slovenia peeled off without there being any real war, because they planned. They looked at their economy, they checked out where and who they traded with. They were sufficiently self-sufficient. The language is sufficiently different. They were close to Pan-Adrian countries of Italy and Austria, and they kind of floated off in a matter of days. They had exactly the same as we are going to have with Brexit, that 50% of their trade was with the rest of Yugoslavia, and they decided that they're gonna suck it and see how it works out.
So your anxiety, I don't know quite how much of a parallel world it is, but your anxiety is about overweening power and centralization.
Well, and it is very damaging for two reasons. One is we have a government and politicians who are totally scientifically illiterate, and that is frightening. And that has been frightening to me for years, because the school system here does not really, through A-levels and GCSEs, doesn't really prepare you to think in scientific ways. So you may have the scientists telling you things, but basically they really don't understand what they hear. They really don't. And I've had the opportunities to see that throughout my working life. You have really got, in the end, I had to produce a cartoon. I used to work in British Petroleum at one point, and in order to get my colleagues, and these were a lot of process engineers, so they were not far from being not scientifically literate. And yet, in order to get them to understand how their long-term decisions, because when you are digging for oil, it is a long-term decision. There are lots of points that come into it, from having the permit of the government through to your explorations, the collaborations, and so on. And so in the end, we produced a cartoon of about 20 pages cartoon to get people to understand what dynamic thinking really means over long term, how things impact each other in unpredictable ways, because time constants are different, you know, and you could see that this pandemic was going to develop in a particular way.
Yeah.
And yet you see the car crash coming, and it is a slow motion car crash that none of us can do anything, because the government is sitting there and playing tiddlywinks.
Yeah, I really admire the way your thought process there. It's I don't know. I mean, not all journalists are prone to chasing shiny objects, but you know, it is a character trait of ours. And I just love the way you just picked your way through that and could see the route ahead from an early point. So thank you.
Well, I don't know that I can see the route ahead, but I can tell you, my daughter is assistant professor at the University of British Columbia in Canada, and they have been doing. She, amongst other things, does the journalism, teaches journalism as in communications, and they've done a research report. I put in the link on the democratic health communications, looking at the cases of 9 countries over 5 continents who have successfully dealt with the first wave of pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you more than half of them are led by women.
Right.
And a lot of it has to do, none of them is the popular political leadership. And they are a mix of lots of money, no money. Senegal doesn't have the money, but they knew how to go, or Vietnam. We don't hear about Vietnam, but they've got an incredibly good control over the whole system. So we really seem to be incompetent and unable to learn. And I cannot understand where that comes from, except that unfortunately, having been a local councillor in Mrs. May's constituency up until May, I can see how this party operates from the inside. And that is not a pretty picture.
Well, Lily, thank you very much for that. And I think you've really given me a different way of thinking about things. So thanks for that. I wonder if we could just turn to Ian Campbell, who again has, if you're feeling able to share in the wider group, Ian, you've talked about your own family's experience, and again, you're one of a number of people who's spoken up in favour of the idea of a Memorial Day. Are you with us, Ian?
Yes, I.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I think Memorial Day would be good, but I just think it's too soon right now. I think my dad's, he's more or less just by himself all the time at the moment, like many older people. I just think it's too soon. I think until people can come together for a Memorial Day, I just think it would be tokenistic. I just think we have to wait until the lockdown restrictions are over before we can plan a proper day when people can come together.
Do you mind me asking about your mum and what happened there?
Yeah, my mum sadly passed away at the start of the lockdown. She hadn't been well for a while. She was in a care home. She'd had strokes. But the hard part for me, as thousands of other people, was that I wasn't allowed to see her the last month of her life because of the restrictions, and my dad wasn't allowed to see her either, her husband. So that was just, it was just something you didn't really expect, you know, that your close family member that you wouldn't be able to see them at all because of what the restrictions. And I think a lot of people have been in that position. A lot of people had a very strange and strange bereavement, not being able to have we were allowed to have 5 people at the funeral. We had, I think there's 6 or 7 that turned up. So the whole bereavement process was very, very strange. I think that's going to be something that a lot of people are going to be coming to terms with over the far beyond what happens with what's going on with the COVID.
Yeah, and there, you know, we can all, I still think, genuinely kind of reflect on some of the early days of COVID and give at least some sort of due acknowledgement that no government had an issue like this to deal with before, and that it was extremely testing. But it's hard, I think, for families to accept the fact that they really sort of adhered to the most grave of restrictions, even while it felt that government itself wasn't taking them that seriously. Is that part of your experience?
I just think it's just totally different when it becomes really personally, my husband was married to him over 50 years, and just to be told that you see to life after days last year, it's just really hard.
We're just losing Ian a little bit. Ian, I'm sorry, you're breaking up there quite badly, but I think, yeah, I think yours is an experience that many families have shared, where there's been an absolute rupture in the way we live and love this year. I hope all of that sets up some of the conversation that we're going to be having over the next few weeks. I think Meripy and the team have put something together which I think is going to be really engaging on Friday. I personally can't wait to hear how Nazir goes at it, because I know that he has this government in his sights, and I think he will be extraordinary. So I think that will kick us off, and then I guess the compact has to be that we have to deliver some journalism on the back of this. It's not just meant to be a talking shop on a bunch of Fridays. So I think that's where we're heading with that. I think unless anyone wants to jump in, my inclination is to say that we've come to a sort of natural rest there. I think that again, to remind you whether some or others think it's not the moment to reinvent the way we live, we're nevertheless having a look at that tomorrow with cities in mind in particular, and to see who's innovating and how we can perhaps change the way we run our lives. Next week we're definitely going to be digging into Scotland, and one of the issues there is certainly Nicola Sturgeon seems to have communicated on a different level to the government in Westminster, but actually the consequences for Scotland have not been that much better. So it's an interesting thing that is someone with a plausible manner just going to get a better press than someone who's frankly a little bit of a shambles. So there is that. But anyway, so Scotland next week, looking at independence in particular, and then I think Friday is the thing that's going to set our direction for some time to come. And I'm really interested to see how we could do something on a Memorial Day for COVID. I think it's an idea that is ready to be made flesh. So thanks everyone for joining in today, and as ever, we'll see you next Tuesday for your pictures and your ideas. And there's a ton of stuff going on as the week goes on. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.